A father's role is not to create a man, but to give his son the tools to forge himself into one through example, discipline, and the quiet strength that speaks louder than words. Unknown author. All right. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. All right. Are we back on track now? Maybe. I don't know. We'll see. Like I said yesterday, it does not take a whole lot to throw me off my schedule. And then I have to start trying to prioritize. And sometimes I don't do that so well. So if I miss an episode, I apologize, but there is a lot going on here. This is not my primary role. Like there's a bunch of things ahead of this, right? So I got my work, got my family, I've got other things that other responsibilities that just came before this or just happened to take priority. So that's just the way it is. But we will do our best to keep it as consistent as possible. And by we, I mean me, myself, and I. I need one of those wah wah. Anyway, I probably have one. I just don't realize it. All right, what are we talking about today? We're going to talk about masculinity. I don't have a dad to bring on, so we're just going to talk about teaching masculinity. It's something that is important to me. It's part of the reason that I do the podcast. You know, it's part of the reason for the name of the podcast because I'm like, look, I'm gonna, when I was before I had the podcast, I was getting ready to be a dad, and I was like, all right, what kind of dad do I want to be? What do I want my son to learn over the years? Like, how am I doing this? And so I start looking back on my life and start thinking like, okay, what lessons have I learned that now I need to teach him? And then when do I teach him? How do I teach him? There's so much, right? And it's difficult because right now we have this. It's probably not as strong now as it was maybe a year or two ago, but you have this idea that there's toxic masculinity. Now, if you've listened to the show at any length of time, you know that I actually don't agree with this notion. I don't believe in toxic masculinity. I don't believe in toxic femininity. What I believe is that there are toxic behaviors, and you might find that women have some of their, there are some toxic behaviors that are more predominant with women, but not exclusive to women. And then you might find some behaviors that are more toxic that you see happen more in men than you do in women. We associate them. So therefore, I think this is where we get this toxic masculinity, toxic femininity. But what I think we really need to do is bring it back and just say, look, there's masculinity and then there's femininity, and it can be done in a good way. It can be done in a poor way. And I think that's a better perspective because then you're like, you can do anything. Like, think of it this way. Think of an apology. So imagine, and I'm going to use me and my wife as an example, not calling her out or me out. I'm just saying, like, just so it makes sense. Imagine we get into an argument, and let's say that I'm being a little bit rude in the argument. We're having a simple argument, dispute, nothing big. We're disagreeing on something. And so then I get snippy and I start saying things that I know that are just going to upset her, right? Like, it's not even now I'm just arguing my point. I'm taking it that extra level and I'm like, you know, making some snarky comments. And then imagine that she kind of points that out and then she were to be like, well, is that really is that really the way that you should be talking to me right now over this, right? And then imagine I recognize that I should apologize, but I'm still kind of irritated. So I go, "Well, sorry for asking questions," right? Something like that, right? I'm just making this up. Well, that's an apology, but it's like a poor apology. Like it's not a good one. It's not a meaningful one. Nobody believes that, right? They're gonna be like, "Dude, seriously? You really expect me to believe that you're sorry? The way that you just came across with that sorry? No way." Right? And so it's still an apology. It's just not a good one. And I think masculinity and femininity can have, they can play out similarly. You can have masculinity that's going well, and then you can have masculinity that's, very poor. Same for femininity, but we're going to talk about masculinity. So let me show you a video. What caught my attention? I love this video. I haven't had a chance to watch the full podcast that he's in. I've watched some of it, and it's some of it's great. But this is Anthony Mackie. He was on the Pivot. I've never heard of the podcast. There's like a bazillion podcasts, and you might be surprised to know that a lot of us don't know about the others. So but I've never heard of it. I assume it's a pretty big podcast if it got a Hollywood star on there. So let me play this video, and then we're going to talk about it because I think, and I'll probably just stop in the middle and talk about it. But I think it's phenomenal. Just a little clip.
I keep my boys humble. Like my boys have never had a pair of Jordans. You know,
I think like right off the bat, like he's like my kids have never had Jordans. Now, if you're, I don't know where Jordans stand today, but when I was a teenager in the '90s, you actually could get shot for your Jordans. In fact, there were kids that got assaulted, stabbed, and shot. I mean, it wasn't an epidemic, but it did happen. There were news stories where like some kid, was really proud of his new Air Jordans. They were like $150. And at the time, $150 for a pair of shoes was like crazy talk. And then some kids jumped him and beat him up and stole his Jordans, right? Like that happened in the '90s. And so the idea of Jordans, I don't know where they stand today. I don't know if those are a big deal now or not. Like, I don't really, whatever. Right. But I think this is phenomenal. He's like, look, I mean, this man clearly makes millions of dollars and his kids are, they don't even, and here's something you may not know. I remember either I read this or I watched it or something, but years ago, um, I learned that Donald Trump did not give his kids like blank credit cards or just credit cards, maybe not even credit cards at all. But like, I think I remember it from Ivanka Trump was in a film called Park Place, something like that. One of her peers, one of her fellow um, kids of a billionaire, they did a documentary, and they were I'm trying to remember that. I just can't think of the name of it was a small documentary. It's like a little indie documentary, but all the kids in it were kids of billionaires, and the kid who put it together was a kid of a billionaire. Can't remember which one, and I think that's where I saw that she was saying like when they were growing up, they didn't even get credit cards, and so I was like, wow, that's pretty wild, because we tend to have this thought that all these celebrities are they just do things so differently. But like starting out, like in the first just 5 seconds of the film, I'm like, man, got this guy has a connection with my mom because she didn't buy me any Air Jordans.
my boys don't do all that internet fly shit. I'm like your kids. And no, I don't give a, I could be the biggest star in the world. Do not let me catch you being stupid. Do not. And my oldest gets it. My 15-year-old, he tell the other ones, he's like, yo, don't make dad mad. Because once you get one that's right, he gonna straighten the other ones out. So it's just that thing of, in the past 20 years, we've We've been living through the death of the American male.
Boom. Right there. I think he's correct. And I don't know, I can't say when it started, but I can tell you looking back, I can see where it was already in progress when I was growing up. And I always point to the sitcoms in my teenage years where you had the dad who was generally lovable, generally a good guy, but he also was presented as like this dude who was aloof. He was just goofy, didn't seem to have his head straight on screwed on straight. You know, he wasn't necessarily the man that you saw as a masculine guy and the kids could go to and get solid answers, right? It was like Tim the Toolman Taylor. The wife would come home and he has concocted something where he's, made the dishwasher run faster by adding Nas to it or something crazy, right? And and he didn't do it in a way like, "Hey, I'm I'm like an engineer and I've just re-engineered this." It was more like, "I'm a hobbyist engineer and look what I did. It just blew up our dishwasher. Oh, goofy me, but it was worth a shot." Right? It was this kind of presentation. And it was okay at the time because it was just laughable stuff. But I think it's grown and it's grown and it's grown. And now we're at a point where we literally have films like documentaries based on the question, what is a woman? Right? Like, because I don't think we have, like, I think there is a distinct what is a man, what is a woman. But I think society has kind of lost sight of that. So anyway, I think he's correct. We have lost it, not in the way that a lot of people present it. I watch it on social media all the time. I see guys get on there, and some of the ways that they talk to and about women, presuming they're guys, of course. I'm like, I kind of understand why you guys are having trouble dating because if that's your worldview, who would want that in a partner? So I think he's correct here, but I want to focus more on, the element of raising your kids and, as a dad, raising your sons in particular, because I have a son. So let's continue listening.
They have literally killed masculinity in our homes and our communities for one reason or another. But I raised my boys to be young men. And however you feel about that, you feel about that. Right. But my boys will always be respectful. They will always say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. No, sir, no, ma'am. They will always say thank you. They will always open the door for a lady. They will always make sure that their mother is taken care and provided for. They will always be men.
I like this. It just really sings to my heart to hear this, and not because of who he is, but that too. I like the idea of a dad saying, "I'm going to raise my son as a young man." And I'm making some presumptions here. I didn't hear his whole story. I don't know how he started out. Like one of his kids is like 15, I think he said. So I'm going to assume that when his kids were like 6, it was all proportional, right? Like he wasn't, he wasn't like, "All right, son, go out and mow the grass," because that's what men do, right? I think he was, I'm presuming again, that it was proportional to age. And so that's what I do with my son. And I teach him. I'm like, "Look, yes, sir, no, sir." Now it's not super strict, but like for instance, he gets corrected whenever he uses his mom's name if it's not talking about her. Now, if he's talking to her and he's all like, "Hey, Christy," I'm like, "Mommy." Like you don't call your mommy or your daddy by their first name. You call them mommy or daddy, or when he gets older, it can be mom or dad. And I guess at some point he'll be like, "Old man." He'll be like, "Hey, old man." He'll have to be older for that for sure. So, but I think there is a certain level. And here, when my son goes places, this is what I hear all the time, and I'm not like I am bragging, but I'm not doing it just to brag. I hear, "Man, your son is so great to be around. He's got a great personality. He's very chill, blah, blah, blah. Like just rounds of praise for his behavior. And it's exciting. And there have been times where we're out and I see some other kid, maybe even at the event that we're participating in, and I'll see some other kid doing something, and just in the back of my mind, I'm like, my son doesn't do that, and it makes me kind of proud to just be like, yeah, my kid is more disciplined than your kid. And we're not talking any crazy discipline. I mean, he's still 6. He still does things and you're like, what? Like sometimes it just doesn't make sense. Um, but he doesn't really he's generally not the kind of kid that gets in a lot of trouble. Like very rarely. Sometimes I wonder if he's actually my kid, because I'm like, wait a minute, you should be getting it by your age. I'm sure that I had already committed a misdemeanor somewhere, somewhere, somehow. Like, and then you have my kid who is like more like my brother and my sister. So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, like when we're at the store, he will sometimes ask the cash register, not the cash, but he'll ask the uh not the cash register. Trying to think. I'm drawing a blank on the name of the person that runs the cashier. I don't know why I short more. I need some more of this caffeine. That's what's going on. So he'll ask the cashier. He'll say like, "Hey, can I have a sticker?" And then they'll look, and then they'll give him one. Usually, sometimes they don't have one, and then and then like he's a little kid, so he sometimes forgets, and so I'll just be like, and then he'll be like, "Thank you," and he's getting better at it. Right? We've almost got him to and this is normal, I think, for little kids. I think normal, because like little kids have to be reminded that you say please and thank you on a regular basis, and it starts when they're little. So he's 6. I mean, we've been doing this for years now. Like please, thank you, and we do that to him. Like I will say, please go clean your room, and or please or do this, please. Not always. Like sometimes it is more of a command. But in many cases, we try to model the behavior that we want him to uh, to adopt. That's what we try to do. So anyway, I think he's correct. I don't have any other kids, so I can't say though. I can't really agree or disagree. But it does sound correct that if you get the first one, especially the oldest one in line, they will help you with the others. Let's continue on. He's talking about please, thank you.
And that's always since they were 2 years old. Every time I left for a job, I tell my 15-year-old, "You the man of the house. You make sure these doors are locked every night. This alarm is on. You text me or you call me every night before you go to bed and you wake up."
I love that.
Because we're men. If I'm not there to protect, he got to be there to protect. Because you can have all the money in the world, climb through the window, that money means nothing.
Right.
You can have all the celebrity in the world, jump through the door, that celebrity means nothing.
Yeah.
So you got to have a little guard in there, And so for me, it's always that idea of American masculinity is very different.
Hold up. Limitless.
All right.
It.
All right. Sorry about that. So I think he's correct, and I love that because I think it's the second, like that's the first time I've heard any celebrity of any kind say something like that. And it's probably, I mean, there's probably other celebrities that believe the same thing. So I'm just not like it's a new thing. It's just I don't think you hear it often enough. I don't think we hear this enough where men come out and say, "Yeah, I'm raising my son to be a young man." I told my 15-year-old when I leave the house, "You the man of the house, you better act like it." Now, my son is 6, so he doesn't get to be the man of the house per se, but sometimes when we leave, we'll leave and we'll let him stay with grandma. And we say, "All right, Zach, we're leaving. You take care of grandma." And he'll say, "Okay, dad." Now, what does that mean? It just keep an eye out on her. And then we have protocols if something happens. And we've walked through them and we've practiced so that he knows how to get a hold of us if there's an issue, if there's an emergency. So we start now. And I tell him, like, look, you're the one that has to take care of grandma. You have to make sure that she gets to her room okay and that she doesn't fall or anything like that. And if, and so And then if something does happen, you've got to be the one to reach out and let us know, or call for call an emergency. And eventually, when he gets older, it'll be the same thing, but maybe with his mom. I'll say like, "Hey, go with your mom. Keep your mom safe." Right? Like he goes with mom now, but he obviously he's sick, so he can't keep his mom safe because he's just too little. But here's a funny story, and you guys will like this. When I was probably about 15 or 16, my dad would do the same thing. Like he at one point worked third shift, and it was my job to, I don't know that he actually, maybe he did say you're the man of the house. I can't remember, but he expected me to protect my mom, my sister, and my little brother. Mostly my sister, because my little brother my sister is 6 years younger than me. My brother is 12 years younger than me, and he wasn't going to school for like he was homeschooled and some other things. So he didn't really wasn't in any areas where he necessarily needed protection, but the same rules applied to him. And so, one night, my mom decided to go shopping at like Target or something like that. And my dad was like, "Son, go with your mom. He's make sure she stays safe," because it was dark out. So whenever it was dark, one of us went with mom. And so I was like, "Okay." So we get our stuff on, we go, and there's a huge woman in front of me, like huge, just ginormous woman. As we're walking into, I think it was Target, but as we're walking into the store, and my mom is behind me, this huge woman's in front of me. She's smoking a cigarette because back in my day, you smoked a cigarette all the way up until you walked into until you walked into the store, and then you usually put it out in the ashtray or flick it or whatever. So that's what this woman did. She goes to flick it, and she swings her arm around to flick this cigarette, and I duck, and then the woman basically blasts my mom. She didn't get hurt or anything, but it was all an accident. And so then my mom gave me a hard time for quite a while, because we came home, and she's like, "He was supposed to protect me, and he let me get hit." Ah. So, but here's the thing. That was just a reaction, and it was a poor one, whatever. But there was here's another story. By the house that we lived on was about it was about a quarter of an acre, maybe about a half an acre off away from the street. So there's a big, huge plot of land. It's one of those houses that's like you got a long driveway and you go up to the house. And we had a circle drive. We had like this big roundabout driveway. It was full of gravel. And one night, it was like 1 in the morning. I don't know. It was late. And I was sleeping downstairs in the basement. So the basement was fully furnished, and I had a room down there. And I could see out of the window. It was one of those windows like at the bottom of the house, but that you could, so it's like little short windows, and you can like peer outside or whatever. And I could see that there had a car was had come in and was making a turn, and then it seemed to have left. And so I was like, "That's kinda weird." And I was like, and at first I thought, "Okay, well, maybe somebody just got lost and they started down our driveway and then didn't wanna back up, so they just kinda continued on and then just turned around." And then, like, a couple minutes later, I heard a sound, like, of people or somebody walking upstairs, like, not like the thump, thump, thump of people walking, but like the creaking of the boards. And so I was like, "Somebody's walking around upstairs." And at first I was like, "Well, nah, I'm probably just hearing stuff." But then I was like, "Well, wait a minute. That really sounds like somebody walking." And then I was like, "Well, what about the dogs?" Because we had 2 dogs. One of them was a German Shepherd, and so I was like, "There's no way that somebody's walking around in the house and the dogs weren't alerted and tearing them to shreds." But I was downstairs and I'm like, "But I don't know." And so I'm like, I gotta go check this out. I can't, like, my mom and my sister are up there. I don't think my brother was born yet, but I was like, my mom and my sister are up there." And I was like, and my dad was at work. And so I'm like, I gotta go check this out. Just in case, just in case. And so at the time, I happened to have a huge knife collection. I was just really into knives, and I had all these knives and daggers and like swords and whatever, all these blades. So I grabbed like a couple of them and I sneak up the stairs. I'm being ultra quiet, and the way that the door when you get upstairs was positioned, you could it was kind of partially open, and you could kind of see somewhat in the kitchen. So I creep up the stairs, and there's I think there was a nightlight on in the kitchen. I think that's what it was, but I could hear somebody like moving things around. I was like, oh my god! I was like, somebody's in the house. I was like, this is it. Like, so I'm ready to stab somebody, right? So I go in there, I'm sneaking into the kitchen, and there I see my mom snacking on something. And I was like, Mom. And she's like, what? And I was like, I almost stabbed you. And she was like, I was hungry. But this is the masculinity that we should be teaching ourselves. Not to go and stab your mom. Like, that's not what I'm suggesting. But this is the kind of masculinity where the moment you think something's wrong, you go and investigate. That's the kind of masculinity we should be teaching our kids, our sons. And our daughters too. Like, this is the expectation for the daughters. This is when you know you have a proper young man in front of you. These are the kind of things. And a lot of it is going to be by how you behave. How you act is how your children will act to a large degree. And that's the kind of thing. I'll give you another story because I think because it's relevant. When I was younger, I was much more afraid of dogs, but I've always loved dogs. But I always had this little fear, especially particularly of dogs I didn't know. And it used to be pretty bad. Like, I would freeze up. Like, I would just be like, you know. And one time I was with my girlfriend at the time, and we went over to a friend's house, and they were like, "Hey, let me put the dogs up," because they had some aggressive dogs. And so they put the dogs up, and we're like, they're like, "Yeah, the dogs are up." And so then we go to walk up the house, and unintentionally, one of the dogs somehow got out. And so then all of a sudden, this dog is now in front. Like, me and my girlfriend are walking up. This dog has come and confronted us, and like immediately, I jump in front of my girlfriend, and I kind of throw out my arms like this, and I don't remember if I said anything but I basically just jumped in front of, he jumped in the way, despite the fact that I'm actually afraid of dogs. But in that moment, I was able to set aside that fear to do the right thing, which was protect my girlfriend. And this is the kind of masculinity that we should be teaching our young boys. This is the kind of masculinity that this is what we should be teaching our young girls, is the proper form of masculinity, is that a man will protect a woman. And even if he's afraid of something, he'll set it aside in that moment to take care of, a woman or a child or even another guy. Sometimes us guys need a little hand, right? Like, masculinity doesn't mean that you're a badass all the time. What it means is you understand that it's your duty to, in certain times, take a risk. Maybe not all the time, right? Like, sometimes you weigh the situation out and you're like, all right, this is the proper course of action. And it's not going to be the televised, the television, the movie version of Batman doing something crazy and being successful, right? Sometimes you don't. Like, if there's a gang of like 7 dudes and they all got guns and they're beating up a guy, that might not be the time to flex your masculinity. That might be the time to go find, some help and call them. But if it's just a dog and it's like your girlfriend, you should absolutely get between that dog and your girlfriend. And I've done the same thing. My son and I, we went somewhere and there was a dog that kind of approached us, and it was loud out. It wasn't being aggressive, but I didn't know it because it just showed up out of nowhere, barked, and then like, now I'm in protect mode. So this is the kind of thing that we have to teach it when they're young. And I think Anthony Mackie kind of like, I don't think he intentionally did it, but I think the progression is kind of the way that it works. You start out by teaching him simple things like yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir. Right. You teach him like, hey, you don't always get the cool Jordans. Maybe you do one day, but maybe today you don't. And then you teach them, more and more lessons and they build up. And if you do it right, by the time that they're old enough to be a protector of any kind, then they are more ready for it. They are more prepared. So I think that's a father's role, is to teach that level of masculinity. Now, will it look different from dad to dad? Sure. It won't always be exactly the same. I've known dads that are kind of like burly, they got the deep voice and they're kind of commanding. They walk in a room and they command the attention, right? You've got those, but then you've got your quieter dads who are more soft-spoken, right? Maybe their value is really giving out a lot of wisdom. Maybe they're not the kind that, goes and throws a wrench around and, works on the car and, some of that more typical dad masculine stuff. Like they may not do that, right? Like it does look a little bit, but there are some core things that are part of it. Being respectful of people, right? We teach our son to be respectful of people and to expect respect. Right? Like, we respect him. Like, if he says no about something in most cases, I mean, he still is 6, but in many cases, we teach him that somebody else's no is just as important as his no, right? And we do our best to not override it unless it really needs to be overridden, and there are cases because again, he's 6. But you teach them early and you give them the small lessons and you build that confidence, and then once they have that confidence, once they're in a position to be somebody that might need to protect another person, and I'm focusing on the protection at the moment, just because I think that's the easiest and most cleanest way of talking about masculinity. There are plenty of other things, sometimes like sometimes it's good to teach them, for instance, when to fight, when not to fight. I think that's a proper masculine role. Son, that was not a wise time to go and fight somebody. Son, you did the right thing. You stood up for this person, you stood up for yourself, what have you. That was the right thing to do. Right? Like there's so many lessons, but I think Anthony is right. We're losing the American male. We've been losing it. It's like the video that I played the other day of Steven Crowder and um, Vivek Ramaswamy, and they were basically talking about how, in some ways, white people kind of envy Vivek because he's brown and he can say certain things that they can't say. And Vivek pushed back, and he was like, "No, you're a coward. You should be able to like if you firmly believe something, you should be man enough. If we're talking about men, you should be man enough to say it." Now, you might need to be mindful of how you say it. Like, it's one like, if you believe that there's male and female and that's it, man and woman, there's no other genders, then say that. That doesn't mean you need to be rude and a jerk to people, right? Because we go back to the idea of respect, which I think is a core foundation. So I always want my son to be respectful. So even and I think it's a good order. You teach them yes sir, no sir early on. They understand the idea of being respectful to people. Then later, when it comes time to stand up and say what they need to say, they can do so in a respectful way, right? Because they know, like, hey, I got to be respectful still, but I also need to express this idea. So, how am I going to express this idea while maintaining this core value, right? These are the kind of lessons I think that we teach our sons. Um, And these are the kind of lessons that I learned from my dad, and I also learned from my mom, right? My mom was a bit, uh, outgoing, I guess. Extrovert seems to not be the right word. I actually like to call her a tough cookie. Like, that was my mom. My mom was a tough cookie. I promise you. She was a lot tougher. Like, I saw what did I say? Oh, yeah, yes. There was a there was a social media post the other day. What was it? Oh, I'm drawing a blank on it. But anyway, one of my mutuals on social media was going back and forth with a guy, and she was basically suggesting that um, women who are what was her? I can't remember what she was saying, but I remember that what I responded with. I said I was telling a story about my mom and how we were watch. She used to love watching Oprah way back in like the '90s, and there was an episode on about domestic abuse, and I never experienced domestic abuse in my house. And so I asked my mom, I was like, "Mom, what would you do if dad ever hit you?" And she was like, "You know that frying pan in the kitchen?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "I would wait till he's asleep and I go hit him over the head with it." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, all right then. And so I was communicating this story to this, in response to this guy. He said something and it was kind of dumb. And he come back and he was like, "Yeah, weak people like to make up stories about what they would do." And I'm like, "I mean, there's some truth to that, but you don't know my mama. My mama was definitely she was a tough cookie like that. Like she did not play games. If she got angry, which happened on a kind of a regular basis, she was a bit of a hothead. You knew it, like, and so it's just funny, looking back and thinking about some of these stories. But these are the lessons that I learned from both of them, right? But especially from my dad. And I like to tell people, I'm like, my mom was more of the tool person, so I learned how to work with tools and do those kind of things from my mom, but I really learned how to be a man from my dad. It was my dad who taught me, this is this is how you become a, and the greatest lesson that he ever did was like the simplest one. I had just turned 18 and I had a habit of going to my mom and my dad and I was asking everything. I was like, "Mom, what should I do here? Dad, what should I do here? This is this. This is," and they would say, they would give me the answer. And then one day my dad was like, "Son, you're 18 now. It's time to be a man. You're going to have to learn to make decisions and learn to live with them." And I was like, "Oh, I don't remember what I was asking, but I remember that." And I'll never forget it because I think that was the moment that I realized, it's time for me to stand tall. And after that, like, I remember I was working at a company and there was a job opportunity on a particular team that I wanted to be on, and I was interviewing for it. And the manager, I don't know why I said this, but I was just like, "Look, I'm going to tell you right now, if you leave me in a position to make a decision, I will make it." And he was like, he kind of nodded and he was like, "Okay." And he was like, he looked at me and he said, "That's fine as long as you stand by it. Don't try to weasel out of a decision that you've made and blame it on somebody else." And I said, "All right." And to this day, like, when it's time to make a decision, I stand behind it. Now, sometimes I will admit I got something wrong, and that's okay. Right? It happens. But yep, I made that decision. Yep, I will deal with the consequences. That is that is part of being, part of masculinity. Now you could argue it's part of, just being an adult. But again, I'm talking about in the context of dads teaching their sons, right? This is the lesson, these are the kind of lessons that we need to teach them. And we need to start early. And we need to invest if upon them in them that they can do things early on and then either they get some praise for it or it's understood as, yep, you're responsible and I have confidence in you. Right? Like there's a certain point where you're not going to get praised anymore But when it's time to talk about why I'm proud of my son, these are the things that are going to come up, right? And my son will know this. So like if he goes out with his mom and he keeps her safe every time he comes home, like maybe the first couple of times, I might say, "Good job, son." But eventually he's not going to hear the good job. But what'll happen is he knows that when it's time to boast about him and say, "Yeah, my son's he's a great kid, he's a great guy." That'll be one of the reasons why, right? And so this is what we have to do as parents, as dads. This is what we have to do. We have to make sure that they understand what their responsibilities are. We have to understand that, yep, initially you get some praise, and then eventually it's not direct praise, it's more indirect. And we hold our head high because we know that we've done a good job with our kids and that they are doing a good job with the lessons that they learned. So that's proper masculinity. All right. So I think what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take some comments here and then gonna close out the show. I know, right? Like it feels early, like 40 minutes in, and it's an early show. But I'm gonna try to start condensing these a little bit to somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour. That's what I'm gonna try to do. That's my goal. I know the last couple of episodes have been like an hour and a half, and or close to an hour and a half. Well, I'm gonna work on that. All right, so let's take a look at some comments here. We got to get our comment music going. All right, so there's our music. Um, let's see. That Liberty Lady says, "I am feminine, but I'm absolutely not a feminist." It's good. That's good. I don't have any beef with. Why is it broken? Doesn't want to come off the screen. El Tigre into house. Why is it not? Things aren't working. All right. So for whatever reason, it's not changing. At least from what I can see, it's not changing. So I don't know. It's stuck. Like I'm clicking on the button, and it's like Rumble is like, "We will leave this comment here, and you will like it." But El Tigre in the house said, "Masculinity, gay, bro." I don't know what that means, but sure. I'm not really sure. But let's see. Is there anything on? Oh yeah. By the way, yes, the chat on Twitter on X is set up correctly. So if you're watching via X, you can comment even if you don't have a blue check. And going forward, I think I've got it worked out. I figured it out yesterday. Finally, I was like, "Oh, I see what's going on." I had two things behind the scenes that were kind of conflicting with each other, and I was able to resolve them. So now going forward, if you are on social media, if you are on X and you want to comment in the chat, you should be able to do so, as long as you're got an account. I think you need an account, but otherwise, so yay me. All right, what else we got for comments here? I think that's it. I think that's all the comments. Let me go back here. Yeah, I don't know why it's not coming off the screen, but anyway, it may stay there for the rest of the episode. I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, all right, folks, it's Friday. I'm gonna get out of here. I want you to have a great weekend, and I will see you back Monday with a fresh bill to review. So, where's my little button here? Oh, there we go. That's what we want. Boom. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com, or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you are there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. You can also become part of the community by heading over to libertydad.locals.com. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.